The storm screamed across coastal Mozambique with a fury that seemed almost alive, tearing roofs from houses, swallowing roads beneath raging water, and turning the shoreline into a battlefield of wind and rain. Yet, above the battered coast stood one silent figure, the old warning siren. It swayed violently on its rusted pole, trembling like a guardian too weak to defend the people below. It had been built to save lives, and yet in that moment it gave no sound, no alarm, no warning, only silence. Below it, chaos erupted as families ran through rising floodwaters, mothers shouted for their children, and flashlights flickered and died in the darkness. Then, through the storm, Amina stumbled to a stop and stared up at the dead siren, her soaked hair plastered to her face, her chest tightening with horror. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "This silence, it cost us everything." And so, with the storm still raging around her, one terrible question hung in the air. How does a community rebuild after the warning meant to protect them fails? Amina had always been drawn to machines. At 28, she worked as a municipal engineer in a cramped workshop filled with outdated parts, broken panels, and rusted equipment stacked like forgotten promises. However, her love for systems and signals was never just technical, it was deeply personal. Years earlier, when she was still a child, she lost her father, a fisherman who was swallowed by a sudden storm at sea. That night had changed everything. As waves crashed against their village and the wind howled through the trees, little Amina had stood helplessly beside her mother, watching the sea take the man she loved most. From that day forward, she made a quiet vow to herself. Storms would not take others the way they took him. She would become someone who could prevent that kind of loss. Yet promises are difficult to keep in a system held together by rust, neglect, and low budgets. In the workshop, Amina often found herself surrounded by older male colleagues who dismissed her ideas before she could even finish speaking. "These sirens have lasted this long," they would say. "Why fix what still works?" She would force a polite smile, but inside, the rejection burned. Still, she kept going. Outside the building, a cracked siren core leaned at an awkward angle, a quiet symbol of broken trust. Meanwhile, on her desk, a small lamp flickered stubbornly in the dim room, its weak glow like a fragile piece of hope refusing to die. And every day, as she walked through the community she served, she saw life balanced delicately between resilience and danger. Women carrying water in clay pots, children running after kites made from plastic bags, and fishermen repairing nets by the shore. The village was vibrant, yes, but it was also vulnerable. So, as Amina watched the waves roll in, her chest tightened with a dread she could not ignore. One day, she thought, these old sirens will not be enough. Soon, that fear became harder to suppress. When a small storm began forming offshore, Amina felt the familiar twist in her stomach. Because she understood the risks better than anyone, she urged her supervisors to run a full system test. Just to be safe, she said, her voice steady but anxious. However, the officials barely looked up from their paperwork. "It's just rain, Amina, let the storm pass," one of them muttered. That night, thunder rattled the windows and a sudden surge raced through the siren network. Then came a sharp pop. The main fuse burnt out. The siren remained silent. No alarm, no warning, only silence. Below it, chaos rumbled through the soaked streets as families scrambled in confusion, unsure whether to move, where to go, or what to believe. Amina rushed outside and stared up at the lifeless tower, the wind shoving against her as if the storm itself were warning her. For a moment, she felt as though she were looking at a ghost, an omen of disaster still waiting to arrive. Her stomach sank. If this were a real cyclone, she whispered, but she could not finish the thought. The silence said enough. Then, days later, the official warnings began to spread across Mozambique. Cyclone Idai was forming offshore, and the forecast suggested it could become one of the most devastating storms in years. Amina's heart dropped as she listened to the bulletin because every word confirmed her worst fear. She rushed back to the workshop, pulled apart the old siren panel, and began checking every component with frantic precision. But the truth came crashing down on her. There were no replacement fuses, no backup battery, no functioning amplifier. The system was not merely old, it was broken beyond what a quick repair could fix. Desperate, she ran to the municipal office and pleaded, "Give me anything, wires, batteries, volunteers, anything." But the officials only exchanged tired glances. "The radio will carry the warning," one of them said. "People will know. The sirens are old. Nothing to be done." Nothing to be done. Those words struck her harder than the wind beginning to gather outside. Meanwhile, confusion spread through the community like a second storm. Some families gathered around radios, straining to hear crackling updates, while others had no radios at all. Rumors moved faster than facts. Fear mixed with uncertainty, and uncertainty bred hesitation. As the clouds thickened overhead, Amina climbed the siren pole at dusk, her small silhouette barely visible against a sky bruised purple and grey. Her hands gripped the cold metal, but there was little she could fix now. She could only watch as wind speeds rose and the sea churned violently below. Her earlier warning, the one no one had taken seriously, was becoming real in front of her eyes. And yet, despite all her knowledge and all her effort, there was nothing left to do but wait. When Cyclone Idai finally struck, it arrived like a force of nature with personal vengeance. The winds howled like a living beast, ripping roofs from homes and hurling debris through the air. Floodwaters burst into doorways, swallowing furniture, possessions, and entire lives in a matter of minutes. Entire neighborhoods disappeared into darkness as the power grid collapsed, and through it all, the old siren tower stood shaking, straining, and trembling in the storm, yet still utterly silent. It was a drowned voice, swallowed by rain, failure, and neglect. Amina waded through waist-deep water with a flashlight clutched in one hand, helping families evacuate as best as she could. She guided an elderly couple onto a fishing boat that had become a rescue raft. She pulled a terrified young boy from a collapsing shack. She heard a mother screaming for her missing child, her cries cutting through the storm more sharply than any siren ever could. Every sight and sound seared into Amina's heart. This should have been prevented. Then, with rain lashing her face, she stumbled toward the siren tower, bracing herself against the wind, and shouted at the dark machine that had failed her people. "You were supposed to protect them." But no answer came. Only storm, only silence. By morning, the world had been transformed into a landscape of wreckage. Debris covered the soaked ground, families wandering in shock, and homes lay shattered like broken shells. Amina sat alone on a broken seawall, holding a damaged siren capacitor in both hands as though it were the remains of a fallen guardian. Her face was hollow, her eyes red, and for the first time the weight of failure crushed her completely. She had warned them, she had fought for repairs, she had begged for support, and still the system failed. That moment became her lowest point, a crisis not just of infrastructure, but of faith. But even in grief, truth has a way of revealing itself. In the crowded women's shelter, Amina sat among survivors wrapped in blankets still damp from floodwater. One mother, trembling as she spoke, said, "We never heard anything. We didn't even know it was close." Another added quietly, "The silence was louder than the storm." Those words struck Amina deeper than she expected. Suddenly, she understood that the failure was not only mechanical, it was structural. It was social. It was about who gets heard, who gets protected, and who is left waiting in silence. That night, by candlelight, she opened her soaked notebook and began to sketch. Slowly, a new vision took shape. Solar-powered sirens that could work during outages, low-cost materials that communities could repair themselves, radio-triggered modules that bypassed bureaucratic delays, and local operators trained to act quickly when danger came. The candle beside her flickered and nearly went out, but it remained lit, just like the hope beginning to rise in her chest. And in that quiet moment, Amina whispered into the dark, "Never again."
At sunrise, she gathered a small circle of women, mothers from the shelter, teachers from the damaged school, and young girls who had once feared every thundercloud. She looked at them and said, "We can build something better." At first, they were hesitant, but then, one by one, they nodded. And so the rebuilding began. The work was not glamorous, but it was powerful. Women searched scrap heaps for usable metal frames. In the abandoned workshop, they soldered circuits with borrowed irons, sparks jumping like tiny stars in the dark. Amina taught them under open skies how to assemble radio modules, test solar panels, and troubleshoot each wire. Laughter slowly returned to the room, mixed with concentration and purpose. Soon, the workshop that had once felt dim and forgotten began to glow at night, alive with energy and determination. It had become more than a workspace, it had become a forge of resilience. Eventually, the prototype Siren rose on a newly reinforced pole. Its solar panel gleamed in the morning sun, and when Amina triggered the first test, a clear, powerful alarm swept across the coastline. It echoed over rooftops, boats, and palm trees, louder and stronger than anything that had come before. Women cheered, some cried openly, children covered their ears and laughed as the sound vibrated through the air. For the first time in a long while, Amina smiled fully, and that smile carried relief, pride, and healing all at once. The community had not simply built a siren, they had built their own voice. Months later, dark clouds gathered offshore once again, churning like a memory returning from the sea. The trauma of the last disaster still lived in every glance, every pause, every tightened jaw. But this time, the community was ready. The women-run Preparedness Committee monitored the alerts, and at the first official warning, they activated the system. One by one, the solar-powered sirens came alive, their panels glowing as alarms rose in powerful unison across the coastline. At the same time, the built-in radio modules broadcast calm, clear evacuation instructions. Families moved early, carrying essentials and guiding children toward designated shelters with no panic and no confusion, only steady, practiced steps. From a hill overlooking the town, Amina watched the evacuation unfold, her tears streaming down her cheeks, not from fear, but from pride. Then the storm struck hours later, crashing into the shore with tremendous force. Winds roared, waves broke, and the sea raged, but no life was lost. As dawn broke, a soft rising sun cut through the remaining clouds like a promise kept. In the weeks that followed, Amina traveled to neighboring towns to train young engineers, community leaders, and local organizers. More women stepped forward, inspired by what they had built together, and resilience committees began forming across the region. The new siren system became more than technology. It became a symbol of community-led safety and a reminder that preparedness can grow from loss. Sometimes the world only changes when someone refuses to accept silence. And in Amina's workshop, her blueprint spread across the table like seeds waiting to take root. Outside, children played beneath a functioning siren that once was a symbol of failure, but now stood as a steadfast guardian. Amina looked out at them and smiled, knowing that somewhere, somehow, her father would have been proud.